Hello, all my entrepreneurs and business leaders, and welcome to the Michael Esposito Show, where I interviewed titans of industry in order to inform, educate, and inspire you to be great. My guest today is a model salesman, once hitting 230% of his very first sales goal at a highly competitive tech company. He's now the global head of sales and the chief revenue officer of Veridium, a cybersecurity identity platform that works with banks and governments to modernize the authentication process. Please welcome Rajiv Pimplaskar.
Thank you, Michael, and it's an honor to be here.
I am so happy to have you on the show today. I want to learn more about your sales background. I want to learn more about your role today and about Veridium and everything that you're doing. But something that you mentioned in your bio to me that really stood out and that I really want to hear more about this story is about your grandmother. You and I share something very much in common where I was also very close to my grandmother, and you mentioned that she was an inspiration to you growing up. My grandmother and I were like peas in a pod. We had the same birthday, January 12th. And in fact, I went on to name my daughter after her, Denise. And wow. So I know that connection and that bond between grandmother and grandson. And I want to hear about yours because your grandmother is still alive today at 103 years old.
That's right. Next month is going to be her 104th birthday.
So her name and her birthday, let's give her a shout out.
Absolutely. Shalini Chirputkar. And she's going to be 104 July 24th, I believe.
July 24th. So happy birthday. I am not even going to try to say her name. I will allow you to do that. But something very cool about her, and obviously her age shows you how close she was able to be to this person, was she was one of the freedom fighters with Mahatma Gandhi. And I would just love to hear about some of the stories or experiences that you learned from her from that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And as you mentioned, I was, In many ways, I feel like a citizen of the world because I was born in the United Kingdom. I had the fortune of moving to India when I was young. I got most of my early education done in India, and then I've been in the States since 1995. So, I can relate to different places in a very visceral way. My grandmother was a very important influence for me growing up. She was a really strong stand for family, for togetherness, for unconditional love. And as you pointed out, she started out with some humble beginnings as well. Joined the freedom movement with Mahatma Gandhi. I think she learned through that process that if you want something, you have to get it. It's not given to you. And for me, I feel I learned that at an early age, both from her as well as my parents, and of course other family members that I interacted with. But with regard to her specifically, I feel the support structure that she provided to me at an early age of just unconditional love. You can do anything. Failure is only in your head. And it's just a next obstacle to overcome is something I think I learned from her. And she's, knock on wood, going strong at 103 today. And, I wish I can grow up to be more like her.
I think we all wish we can make it that far. Is there any story in particular that you can remember of her and her work and efforts in India with Mahatma Gandhi?
Yeah, so in fact, obviously I was too young. I'm a 70s child, so this is several decades before me. I know she spent a night in jail, due to the Satyagraha movement in India. Some of the early stories that I remember of her are, really her frugality, and I think that was something that she got. In core from Gandhiji's principles. He was very much a sustainable human being, as they say these days, right? Everything from the fabric on his own back was woven by him.
Right.
And so she was very, frugal. Like I said, she lived within her means. She, focused energies on just doing the right thing at the right time. She didn't dwell too much about the past or anxiety about the future.
Right.
It was very much here and now kind of
like a mindful, what we call today mindful living.
Exactly.
Which is it's a big movement now where you have all these different apps, Calm, and I use Headspace, and being mindful and mindful living and living in the present moment, and that's something that Gandhi obviously taught. So you took that from her. I think when you speak about the frugality, it reminds me of my grandmother too. It's very similar. She would probably be very close in age to your grandmother at this point, but she also had a very frugal nature, and I think it's really appreciating and being grateful for what you have is what you learn from them. Like that's what I took from it, where my grandmother really wouldn't throw something out until she figured out that there was no use for it at that point. So my poor wife has to deal with me sometimes keeping a coffee container for a week in the house because I'm like, are you sure there's no use for this coffee container? But I picked that up from her, and she was raised in Haiti and went through the big Duvalier movement there. Yes. And so she was also, I think that those movements kind of shape those individuals. And obviously we could see that with your grandmother. So staying in your childhood, just share with us a little bit about growing up and you coming to the States and what that was like, what that transition was like. And really what I'm thinking about is the impact that it had on you today and where you ended up in your career.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Yeah, so growing up, what was an interesting experience. As I mentioned, my parents themselves were immigrants to the United Kingdom. My dad's an architect, town planner, so he moved to the UK in the 60s. There was something called the New Towns Act that the United Kingdom had passed, and this was about rehabilitating and creating new housing for poor Brits or individuals who had been displaced after the Second World War. And so my dad moved there. My mom is a researcher. She focused on sustainable agriculture, and they had me in the 70s, like I said. And at some point they realized that it's important for any individual to know more about themselves and where they come from and their culture. And because of that, I think that was a big influencer in their decision to move back to India. For me as a elementary school kid, age 5, as you can imagine, it was a bit of a culture shock moving from the United Kingdom to India at the time. Very quickly I learned how competitive things were. I learned the value of family, right? There was a lot more people around me that, I didn't frankly know existed before then. And I think that in a very important way shaped some of my future thinking around, I need to get back to the West at some point, but I need to make the most of what I have now in front of me. And so I have to say in school, I was a fairly average kid, nothing remarkable to write about. In fact, my parents would probably even argue the average point. An interesting break I got was in college when I was doing my bachelor's in electrical engineering. And the Indian education system is semester-based, so you have 2 major exams a year.
Okay.
And it's a 4-year course, but the first 3 years are kind of individual, years where you learn new stuff, and the 4th year is a cumulative year. So unlike the GPA system where your GPA is kind of across all 4 years,
right.
Here your grades are really determined in the 4th year. And like I said, very average child going into the 4th year, and with an aspiration of coming to the United States afterwards for further education. The first semester of my 4th year, I got a really important break. We had an oral exam and a written exam, and I aced my orals. And that brought me to what they call first class with distinction, which is sort of the like a API honors kind of equivalent. And I came 3rd in the college as a result of that. And so here I am, waking up. I'm like, oh man, what just happened? right? It was an experience I didn't really have,
You went
experience
from
of that
average to the third student.
in the whole, university. And so now, obviously, I have to live up to it, right? And so I really applied myself in a way that I never had before. And I wound up actually getting third again for the next semester. But this time I believe it was based on what I had actually put in. I truly deserved that one, I feel. And so the net of it is I went from being average to, almost at the top of my class. And, of course, the doors opened for future education. I got numerous, opportunities to study, and also financial aid, which, as you know, when you're an immigrant, it's very hard to, pursue graduate studies or anything like that without financial aid. So I was very fortunate to be in that situation.
Wow. I'm interested in the oral exam because I'm assuming that played into your career in sales, of you having this technical background, engineering and everything, and then you get tapped on the shoulder going to sales. Sales, as most salespeople know, it's relationship driven and being a very good orator. And so you did really well. You aced your oral. I'm interested in this oral exam, what it entailed and what you maybe had to do in it.
Yeah, it's funny you ask. It's still a fairly vivid memory, of mine. It was a chemistry, exam, and I had to speak with, in front of a panel of judges and present the findings of a certain topic that we were all working on, and I guess maybe the seeds for my future career had been planted at the time. I just didn't realize it. Just mainly because it was a blind spot for me. But net result was the teachers kind of gave me a standing ovation, and the results actually reflected it.
Wow! And so, were you already a very good conversationalist or a speaker in class or things of that nature? Did you already kind of know that you're comfortable getting up in front of people and speaking?
Well, I was good in getting out of problems by talking.
Okay. We won't get into that.
But no, I don't necessarily consider myself a great orator, or even for that matter, an extrovert per se. I do agree that sales is a lot about kind of putting yourself out there and connecting with people. I believe I genuinely do have a interest in people, but at the same time, I'm equally comfortable sort of, sitting back and listening to them, right? And reflecting their points back to them rather than, necessarily having to fill the silence with my own, thoughts. But obviously I didn't know any of this back then. Yeah, no,
it sounds like very empathetic, and which you picked up from your grandmother, like you said. And when I think about our audience of entrepreneurs and business leaders, is that's something that people forget when they're doing sales training, is empathy, is they think that it's about pitching the product and pitching the solutions and pitching all of the key components to it. But a lot of the times it's really listening to the client, listening to the prospect and hearing what are their needs, what are they saying to me, and maybe right now my solution is not best. And if you could empathize with them, and which we learned from our grandmothers, if we can empathize with them, then we can find the solution. And then maybe it's not in that moment, maybe it's down the road. I think that that's a really great learning experience. So very unique. So you came from, so you're born and raised, born in the UK till 5 and raised till 5. Then you moved to India. I'm assuming you spoke Indian at home. And
correct.
So when you had this oration, you had to do it in Indian. So you had to do that, right?
That's correct.
And then you come to the States right after that to get your MBA.
Yeah, so I actually, at that time, I was still very much a techie. So I came to the United States. I wanted to pursue a master's in engineering as well. I actually wound up doing my computer science as my master's degree. And then through a series of events, I wound up actually staying on and getting an MBA afterwards.
Okay. And so English now was always a part as well of school for you. So that wasn't a big hurdle either then, coming here, or?
Yeah, I would say that it wasn't our first language, right? And so I know a lot of folks, who are immigrants struggle with English as a first language concept. And I would say I had my set of struggles with it. But I applied myself to it and, got to a certain degree of proficiency, let's say.
And so was there a community? So, and where did you come when you came? Was it New York or was it California? Because I know you spent some time in Silicon Valley.
Yeah, that's correct. So initially I came to Philadelphia.
Oh, Philly. Okay, right.
I have 2 uncles who live in the Philadelphia area.
Okay.
They both, welcomed me. It was the proverbial immigrant story. I came with 2 bags and $500 in my pocket.
It's always that much, right?
Yeah, exactly. And one of my uncles, he took me in, so I had an opportunity to spend 1 month with him and his kids. At the time, they were also graduating from college and moving on to their future journeys. And so I had all of summer of 1995 to essentially get indoctrinated in the U.S. way of doing things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that community is very important. My mother, she ended up immigrating to the States at 13 years old. Well, she went to Canada first and then came to the States. So I was like 13, 15 years old. But there's a welcoming community there. She stayed with an aunt and everything. And I think that's very important when you're doing all of that. So you get your engineering degree and all that. And so you're figuring yourself out in Philadelphia, and I'm interested in Silicon Valley because that's leading into where you are today to some extent, right?
Yeah, that's correct. So the after my master's, this was the .com era, right?
Yes.
And so you could pretty much, as a techie who could walk and chew gum at the same time, pretty much pick what you wanted to do.
I'm sorry, just one kind of like question there, because you said techie before, and I don't want to miss this opportunity, is what drew you to technology?
I think that's another interesting observation. So I'd say in general, an Indian kind of, family orientation is more professional in nature. Mm-hmm. So for example, if it's sort of expected that you either go to engineering or do some sort of a professional degree, mm-hmm. like architecture or, even medicine, right? And the arts are something you kind of evolve into mm-hmm. rather than, having that as a passion from day one. Obviously, we don't think like that these days, but, I have to say I must have been a product of some of that type of thinking.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And so you're a techie, and now you're drawn into the industry.
Yeah, so that's an interesting journey. So I joined Bell Atlantic in 1995, as a matter of fact, and my first role there was as a field engineer. Mm-hmm. So they figured that I needed some real world experience of how things actually happen before I knew what I would do with myself. Mm-hmm. And so, I joined Bell Atlantic, had a really supportive management team. And I, started doing a lot of the projects. At that time, we were wiring up the schools in the Philly area for internet access.
I was just going to ask you what Bell Atlantic was doing in '95, because that would have been kind of like considered a tech company at the time.
Yes.
Which now looking back, we're like, that was a tech company?
Yes, they were dabbling in other areas besides traditional telephony. So I wound up being a field engineer, deploying internet services, private line services for a lot of local and regional school districts across Philadelphia, and an interesting phenomenon happened, which was that most of the sales managers started specifically requesting me to do the deployment work for their projects. Mm. And, at first I wasn't quite sure what was going on, but I think it was just a function of having, proper hygiene around doing the job and, really being kind of looking out for the customer. I never left until I knew that the customer was happy. And at the time, there was a sales director for the region called, his name was Liam Brohan, another great mentor of mine in that period. And Liam made an observation. He said, you seem to really have a great knack with customers. Why don't you try, your hand in sales? And, having gone through a master's education, right, this was definitely a fork in the road, right? And yet at the same time, I didn't know where this path would lead. It sounded interesting. It also sounded risky, but I wound up taking the plunge. And suffice to say, I think you said this in your opening. The very first year I went into sales, I wound up doing 230% of my number, and I wound up trading in my Honda Civic for a BMW M3, and never looked back.
I think that's such a great story of coming up, and then there's a fork in the road there. And I think when I'm thinking about our audience again of our entrepreneurs and business leaders out there, there's the entrepreneur who is trying to carve their own path and trying to just take a risk and a chance, which in this moment, you were like an entrepreneur. You had to make a decision and carve your own path in sales. And that was an entrepreneurial role. But when I think about our business leaders and what I identify as business leaders are the people that are working in a corporate environment and trying to climb the ladder. Mm-hmm. And you had an opportunity here to climb the ladder, which you obviously did successfully. And this was, I think, a very pivotal moment in your career. And I just want to highlight some of those things and kind of just pick apart some of the great things that you did there that got you noticed. Because, and I've spoken about this before, where there are people in a career and they're not moving, they're stagnant, and they don't understand why. Why am I getting overlooked for a promotion? Why am I getting overlooked at my position or not appreciated? What can I do different? Mm-hmm. And you mentioned to me that hard work and work ethic and customer satisfaction were priorities to you. I'd like to kind of just dig into that a little bit more and see if maybe you could elaborate a little bit more on that or share some more insight there that could really speak to that so that somebody who's listening and is feeling a little stagnant can say, you know what, maybe I can do this a little bit differently and get noticed, because you got noticed by Liam. And if you didn't get noticed by him, maybe you'd still be tinkering with engineering.
Very likely scenario. I agree with everything you just said. I think it's interesting. I think promotions, are not so much given, they are earned. Mm. And it's a subtle difference in context and how you should look at it. I think first and foremost, you need to master what you're doing and then be able to see the bigger picture. Mm. And, some of the elements that, you hit on, like customer satisfaction, work ethic, being efficient at your work, right? So you have a few extra hours rather than not do anything in that time. You apply that to learn something about the business or learn something about a adjacent function, right? Mm-hmm. I think these are all ways in which you're making yourself more valuable to the employer without necessarily, looking opportunistic about it. And I think the other aspect here is there's an element of authenticity that's important. Mm-hmm. If you're doing this purely with the objective of scoring the next job, it's going to come across, right? And so it has to really be something that you imbibe as part of your, day-to-day. Mm-hmm. And frankly, what's important with that is when you do get that next job, it's important to have mastered the previous one. Otherwise, if you have a faulty foundation, the superstructure is also going to be pretty weak.
Yeah, I like that part of mastery is that it's really, and the only way you're going to master it, because it kind of goes hand in hand with what you just said there, is by doing the work outside of the job itself. And something that you said is customer satisfaction. And we know that Amazon, that's their number one priority is supreme customer satisfaction. And for you, the customer satisfaction is what relayed it back to the management team to know that, hey, we got to have this guy on the next job here. I'm thinking now about the sales journey that you have. So you hit 230% of your goal. And is there any way that we could put that into context so that people can understand that? I think sales goals are kind of like an anomaly sometimes. A company sets a sales goal, and sometimes hitting 70% of the sales goal is a success. Mm-hmm. And then other times reaching 230, it's kind of like, well, was the sale goal high enough? So could we put that into a little bit of context as well?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Goal setting, as you rightly point out, is both an art and a science. Yeah. There's a scientific element to it, right? There's certain growth objectives that the company has, and you divide the target by the number of quota-bearing heads, and maybe there's some level of over-allocation based on certain factors, and then that's your target, right? The way I personally look at goals is, they have to be stretched. They have to be something you aspire for. If they aren't, then I don't think you're doing yourself a service or the organization a service. That said, it shouldn't be so far out of the realm of possibility that it becomes a demotivator for both the organization and the employee themselves. So, at the time, there was, this is the .com, boom, right? So there was money that the federal government had allocated for growing internet and digital services across various, hospitals and school districts. And so there was a certain, growth expectation on part of the organization. 230%, however, and by the way, that was the first year I did that. Since then I've had the privilege of having multiple years, right, where I've either achieved or overachieved on my number. And, every year it's a little bit different. I think to your point, the context is different, the objectives are different, and yet overachievement universally, I think, means the same thing.
Yeah, it does. And you mentioned stretching yourself. So you reached this goal, and this is only an example of something that you obviously did consistently in your sales career, but sticking to this so we don't confuse our audience of the 230, right? So in order to accomplish that, that's 130 past the 100%
Correct.
mark. What was your personal goal? Because that's really what you're working towards, right, is your personal goal. And that's
Yes.
when we go back to mastery and all the other things, the other great elements, it's our personal goal. So that year, and it's okay if you didn't have one set then, kind of like your oral presentation back in the day, right? But maybe there was one. Was there a personal goal that you were trying to achieve that year?
Yeah, it's a good question. at that particular point in time, I don't think there was a personal goal other than to do my very best.
Right.
So I actually looked at it not so much so from an outcome perspective, but from an effort, activity, and behavior perspective. Because I didn't really know what kind of an outcome I was going to be able to get. It could be high, it could be low, but what I could count on was the effort I put in, the actions I took, and the behavior I demonstrated. And so my personal goal was to really kind of stretch myself on all of those 3 points and then see where the chips fall. And turned out to actually work well for me in that situation.
I love that you said that, because I was going to ask you what your sales principles were. And it sounds like those are your principles in sales, of the effort and the hard work. And something else that you're saying there, and you mentioned it too, like back in your collegiate career, which is that the first year you didn't really know what to expect, but you knew if you worked hard, the reward would come. And when we think about entrepreneurship, we think about what you just said too with any business leader out there, is that you might not, don't be looking for the next step or what the next paycheck looks like, or as an entrepreneur, the next round of seed funding or whatever. Just work really hard and make a great product and great customer satisfaction, and that'll come. And then from there, you mentioned that then you could kind of set the goals aligned with what you're seeing happening, right?
Yeah, it's a very subtle point, and I think it's a very important point. Clearly, business today, sales today is all outcome driven, right? I think that's just the nature of the beast, right? So you have to have your eye on the ball with regard to what outcomes you're trying to seek, right? KPIs that you're shooting for, key performance indicators, right, as we call them. Having said that, I do believe that the outcome is just that. It's a result of doing things right. And we sometimes forget that part of the equation. It's easy for a boss to just beat up a salesperson because they're not at target. But if you kind of peel back the onion to understand the underlying reasons why, is the structure conducive? Is the product market fit right? Is the goal too much of a stretch goal? Has this individual been properly trained? Then I think are they empowered and passionate about what they do? I think those reasons matter in my experience.
They are huge. I myself am in sales, and definitely all of those factors play in, and trying to figure it all out, and finding the right fit, like you said, is, to me, probably one of the most important parts, because you can prospect 100 people, and if none of them are the right fit, then you just wasted 100 phone calls or emails or whatever. Whereas if you prospect 10 of the right, like you said, product market fit, maybe 5 will respond, because you actually have a solution for them. And then, like you said, the hard work of just doing that consistently and doing it over and over again, the results will come from it. Before we get into Veridium, I want to just fly out to the West Coast.
Yes.
And hear about Silicon Valley, because I've read a tremendous about Silicon Valley. I've heard a lot about Silicon Valley through these different people like Steve Jobs and Elon Musk and everybody, right? But I'd love to hear it through your eyes and your experience there and what you did and how it was.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I had 10 wonderful years at Verizon and various Verizon subsidiaries. I was put on succession planning, which meant they wanted me to try different things in order to, get good at it and learn the business. And, I kept moving. So I moved from Philadelphia to Michigan for a period of time. Then I came to New York for the last 4 years of my Verizon career. At the time, I had a national accounts role, so I had something like 65 people reporting to me across 3 regions. Focusing on the top 150 accounts that Verizon had, and I'd learned a tremendous amount. I had learned ethics in business. Verizon's a high quality company, great individuals, and I believe I picked up sort of the best-in-class way of doing things at Verizon. However, 10 years into this journey, I felt my head was getting a little bit bell-shaped, and I needed to try something different. And this is where I had an unprecedented opportunity to basically join a Silicon Valley-based startup called Atlantis Computing. It was founded by an individual named Chetan Venkatesh. I had the privilege of meeting Chetan, as part of a VC event in India, as a matter of fact, in 2016. And we hit it off. And Chetan wanted a head of business development and head of sales. And so I took the plunge with him. It was a hell of a journey. It's everything it's hyped up to be and more. And I got a front row seat to what Gartner calls the hype cycle. So Gartner is a famous analyst firm out there. They talk about technology adoption, and unlike what we would think, where technology, you invent the wheel and it just sells itself, all technologies go through what's called a hype cycle.
Okay.
So you have a technology trigger. Something new comes to the market. It very quickly elevates from the perspective of visibility in the market. It reaches the peak. It's in fact called the peak of inflated expectations. And then it collapses because it cannot integrate. There's certain issues that haven't been thought through. And it collapses into what's called the trough of disillusionment, where it languishes for a while. And this is where version 2.0 comes out, version 3.0 of the product comes out. They fix some of these integration problems, and it recovers slowly on what's called the plateau of productivity. And in fact, I think that's called the slope of enlightenment, and it eventually gets to the plateau of productivity. So this is a very interesting journey, because companies who are looking for technologies that are widgets, right, just replacing one with the other, they typically buy technologies and products that come out from the other side, that are on that plateau of productivity, proverbially speaking. However, companies that are looking to let's say like you're a trading firm and you're trying to shave off a nanosecond in order to, get a leg up on your competitor, then you're buying into that initial curve. And so this gives you a lot of insight around things like, early adopter, innovator segments, early adopter markets, and then mainstream and late mainstream. So, I joined this firm right at the moment of the technology trigger. The first 4 years were the proverbial strapping yourself to a rocket ship, scaling the business, 4x year over year, right? We got to a point where, it stabilized, and this was then about, growing the business across different regions. And then finally it got to a point where the technology itself was commoditized. And, we actually wound up missing a couple of pivots in the business that led to more of a graceful exit that ultimately worked out well for customers and employees, but not so much so for the shareholders.
I have a couple questions in there, but first, I'm interested in, and only because I'm thinking of Indian culture, I'm interested in your dad's responses to the risks that you've taken along the years here. Did he have any typical cultural response to you taking these different risks?
Yeah, it did raise some eyebrows. I would be lying if I didn't acknowledge that. But having said that, I think I do pride my parents and my family in being very supportive of me. And, this notion that, hey, look, we raised you the best we could, and so you should know what to do at this point in time. So it was a very empowered context, which is kind of, frankly, also risky because that means it's my decision.
Right.
And so, I'm accountable for it.
They trusted your instincts is what it sounds
Yes.
like. And then the other one is a little bit more of a fun question is on that rise in Silicon Valley, because as I said, we hear all the stories of Silicon Valley and it being this like pretty much like this fraternity, this like awesome experience for these startups that are on the rise. I understand it's definitely not for the ones who aren't on the rise, but you experienced this rocket ship. What was that moment like? What was that feeling like of pretty much flying high in the top tier? It's like you're like the MVP of the NBA. It's like you're playing in the best. You're playing against the best of the best in Silicon Valley, and you're on this rocket ship. What was that feeling like? What was the environment?
Yeah. Look, it's hard to explain. It's unreal. It's amazing. And, I think the Silicon Valley in particular is blessed because of the weather. You have so much talent, within,
Right.
that small region. And it sort of creates it's a perfect breeding ground for that ecosystem of, financiers, brainiacs who have ideas, method individuals who can operationalize it, and all of that kind of coming together at a point in time, right? It's very unique, and very few places around the world have that type of human capital at its disposal. The experience is interesting because at the end of the day, it everything turns inward. And what you realize is that you can take two sets of actions. There's a set of actions that come more traditionally from the perspective of avoiding risk. And I would argue that a lot of actions these days are based on that. And yet they're orthogonal to the actions necessary in order to achieve success. In order to go for success and actually achieve it, you have to be vulnerable for failure. You have to be able to put yourself out there and risk, failing, losing face, all of the things that confront us, right? And so that experience, I think, more fundamentally taught me how to kind of break through my own, blind spots and my own internal barriers, and to quote a cliche, kind of be all you can be.
Right. What might be one of those barriers that you had to overcome, and how did you do it?
Yeah. So my the individual that I joined and started working with, Chetan, he's now become a really good friend of mine. As a matter of fact, over the years, he believes very deeply in the concept of a context. Right. It's the equivalent of playing a tennis match at a local tennis court and playing the same tennis match in Wimbledon. Right. Yeah. The context is very different, and it's defining. And a lot of times we are not as aware or as in tune with the context as we should be. As a startup, you have to kind of put it all out there, right? You have to be prepared that if this bet fails, you may not have food to eat tomorrow, right? But with that comes empowerment. You're not holding back on the action. And I think that you learn that. It's almost like the sports, immersion experience in some ways.
You become so focused on that one goal that everything else, the safety net, everything's gone. And the only place to go is towards that goal.
Correct.
And so you're immersed in it. I think that's such great advice, what you just shared in those moments there to our entrepreneurs and business leaders of that looking inward and understanding that fear is sometimes holding you back. And my business coach, Merritt, would call it your gremlin. And she would say, that's your gremlin. And your gremlin is there, or that fear is there to keep you safe. It's part of our nature to keep ourselves safe and to protect us. And it's very hard to do what you just said, which is to see it, understand that fear, understand that it's real, and then focus on that goal and readjust.
Absolutely. And I would argue that it's actually not trying to keep you safe. It's actually trying to keep your self-image and this sort of mechanism that you've built around yourself.
Your ego
safe. And I say this even today to a lot of my reps is, my job is not to make you comfortable. My job is to make you successful. And in order to get successful, you have to lose the comfort. You have to be operating in a zone of discomfort.
Yes, and I've heard that multiple times. So that's a great lead into going to Veridium. So I could only assume that during this rocket ship and even on its way to plateauing out in Silicon Valley, that there was just a tremendous amount of opportunities being pushed your way, people reaching out and everything. So how does Veridium come into play here? And who is Veridium? I know that we talked a little bit about it, but obviously doing some tremendous work. We'll get into some of the work that they're doing, but yeah, let's go to that journey now. So you're...
Yeah, so 10 years into the Atlantis journey, I decided, it's time to do something different. We parted as friends over there, and I wound up doing a brief stint at a company called Cloudmark in San Francisco. They got acquired by Proofpoint, which in turn has now gotten acquired. And at the time, Veridium was recruiting me quite heavily. One of the board members at Veridium was a former CEO of mine from Atlantis, and one of the CEO of Veridium at the time was a former client of mine at JP Morgan Chase from Atlantis. And so I think I had a comfort level about the company when I joined them. Veridium is a leader in digital identity. So the focus is really passwordless, multi-factor authentication. As you know, identity is the core of anything we do, right, at a corporate level or at a consumer level. And Veridium helps in securing the authentication and eliminating some of the friction that can deplete user experience, as well as the security bottlenecks that can promote fraud and things like that.
And it's actually, and I'm kind of jumping ahead a little bit on some of the work that you guys do, but you also work with some non-for-profit agencies. And something we're going to kind of just steer off the path of leadership for 1 second, only because I thought this was so important, and I just don't want to miss it, was you help companies and access management solutions for survivors of human trafficking. I don't know if there's any insight that you could share about that, because that's something that isn't talked about a lot at all. And I thought it was very poignant for you to put that in your bio to me, that you actually mentioned that, so I'm assuming that that's something very important to the culture and what you guys are working towards.
Yeah, absolutely. So, again, Veridium is a for-profit organization,
yes,
and our customers are banks and insurance companies and governments and telecom companies. However, to your point, there is a humanitarian aspect. One of the capabilities that Veridium has is the ability to convert a mobile phone into a biometric capture vehicle using the front-facing camera for facial recognition, or the rear-facing camera for fingerprint, capturing and recognition. And both these images can be matched against legacy databases, so like a crime database, for example, or an Interpol kind of database, as an example. So Veridium has had the privilege, and I've had the privilege of working on several projects that have been humanitarian in nature. There was some early work done with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation around Africa, and potentially helping with vaccines. At the time, it was Ebola.
Right. This is going back to 2015. He's been talking.
Exactly. And it's, in certain places, there is a monetary benefit that the families get for vaccinating the child. And so what you don't want is a situation where that same child keeps be brought in multiple times. And so biometrics are a great way to capture and make sure that it's the unique individual involved. The example that you talk about was a project we did in California with a company called Annie Cannons.
Yes.
They're a all women owned social organization that focuses on survivors of human trafficking, particularly from the southern border of the United States. And one of the issues is the continual having to report trauma as part of applying for various social services. And so by creating a ring-fenced identity system and solution for them where they have to do it just once, and then being able to even access the entitlements that they have on a phone that may not even be theirs. So when we think about something like a Face ID, Touch ID with Apple, there's an inherent sort of privilege expectation that individual actually has a phone that has Face ID and Touch ID.
Right.
What if they don't? What if they're just using someone else's phone at a point in time?
Right.
And so you have to have a capability that's independent of the devices. So we implemented this solution in conjunction with them. It's we're proud to do our part.
I think that's really cool. And I love the part that you said that they don't have to relive their trauma over and over again, because I think just filling out a form when I'm doing a health check at the doctor's is like just a nuisance. So not to make light of their situation, but if something so minimal as just putting in my insurance information to fill out a form is annoying, I could only imagine having to relive a traumatic situation and you guys alleviating that. I think that's just such a great technology that you guys implemented and can be used in so many different ways as well. So it's really, really great. And so I wanted to make sure we touched on that. I do want to talk about your leadership style, because you mentioned that your job now, so you're the Chief Revenue Officer, you're Global Head of Sales, you manage a lot of people. And some would say that that's probably the hardest job in an organization, is managing all of these different personalities and people and keeping them motivated and keeping them on track, getting them on goal, helping them stretch themselves. So I'd love to hear about some of your management style. You mentioned about how you like to being tightly aligned and loosely coupled. So I'm interested in that philosophy and kind of pulling that apart a little bit and understanding it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And look, there's a lot of great material on this topic, right, available. I think most of what I have seen from a leadership perspective applies to, people management and motivating and keeping individuals motivated. But I think there's another aspect of leadership that's equally important, which is perhaps not discussed that much, and that's situational leadership. And this is where you don't need a fancy title in order to do the right thing. It's really about, in any situation, right, kind of recognizing where the gap is, what needs to be done, and anybody, being able to step up to the plate and fulfilling it and demonstrating leadership. And so I'm a big believer of that. And so my philosophy is really about creating the conditions for winning, and, winning will happen. So the tightly aligned, loosely coupled style, again, it's something I learned in Silicon Valley through my Atlantis experience. What it really boils down to is you have to be, there's a famous picture I remember seeing of two railway tracks that sort of get there, right? But they're not, 100% connected, right? There's a slight gap between them. And the moral of the story is that being kind of partially aligned doesn't work. You have to be fully aligned. And so I think sometimes it's often overlooked, the efforts and activities needed in order to get fully aligned. But being fully aligned is absolutely critical. And it can be a fairly messy process to get there. But I believe that you have to be fully aligned on what the goals are, what are the, guardrails around the activities necessary in order to get the goals. And at the same time, loosely coupled means it's really about execution. And, when you hire the right people, right, my hiring philosophy is you hire based on values and abilities and skills you can train for. I find that really helps, as opposed to a lot of folks who try to hire for the skill without checking whether the values are compatible and the abilities are really those that the individual can grow into, as the role evolves, because this is a high change environment.
Right.
So loosely coupled to me is about giving the folks the space that they need in order to be successful. But as long as you're tightly aligned and you're loosely coupled with the right parameters, you can actually get there a lot faster than in a corollary situation where there's a lot more management and hands-on involved.
Yeah, it sounds like so. It's providing the structure and then giving the autonomy is kind of what it feels like to me. Something that I'm thinking about when I think of your title, and I love the fact that you try to break it down to where there isn't any. But being somebody who works in a corporate environment, and there are titles, and there's sometimes a bit of a let's say distance between your rep, your person that's out there on meeting with the clients, up to the C level. How do you keep that connection between you and those people? Because like you said, several hundred employees. So how do you keep connected to these salespeople and being able to help them achieve?
Yeah, so it's about communication, right? You have to over communicate. It's very important to have access. So I personally do one-on-ones with my team every other week, and I do split levels where there are some either with myself or the CEO for the team as well. And so it's really about kind of making yourself available to the individuals. And then there also needs to be communication these days has kind of grown quite organically, right? You have tools like Microsoft Teams where there are channels and different ways of communicating and archiving that information. And email still considered the more formal type. So for me, it's really about having an open door policy, right? As we all work from home these days, it makes it kind of somewhat easier. I've actually dabbled with the idea of doing like a 1 hour open office Zoom where anyone can just pop in and ask me anything that they want. But for now, the one-on-ones coupled with the communication processes that we have seem to work.
Yeah, it's communication is. I'm very happy that you chose that because that is, I think, sometimes what happens. That's the big disconnect between these various roles, titles, and everything, is that there isn't communication, or it's only through email or memos. And for you, the open door policy or open Zoom policy, which I'm sure you will implement at some point, somehow or another, right? It can get complicated, I'm sure. But communication is I think key to leadership, is being able to communicate your ideas and your goals. Moving into, and we talked a little bit about some of the work that your organization does. I just am thinking about some of the work and initiatives that you already have that you are doing, and I'd like to hear a little bit more about them. You've gone back to India and are working with non-government agencies in India and are doing some work there. I'd like to hear a little bit about that humanitarian work that you're currently doing.
Yeah, look, I mean, that's a topic that personally is of great interest to me. My wife works in a hospital, and she runs a bariatric program, and so this is a topic of sustainability. It's about empowerment, and we're both passionate about this. So I have to say, one of my pet peeves is I wish I could do more. But having said that, what I do focus on these days is really, searching out organizations that have a proven track record in actually meeting the needs of the individuals. India, again, because my roots are there, it kind of, makes sense to me to look at that. And India, what's interesting about it is, as much as there's so much population in the various cities, the heart of India is actually the villages. And the heart of the villages is the families. and the heart of the family is the caregiver, usually the mother of the family, right? Or
matriarch.
The matriarch of the house. And so, I learned this lesson from my mother. She spent a lot of time with non-government organizations in India. They were promoting mushroom cultivation at the time. So, as you know, a lot of Indians are vegetarian. And so sometimes they tend to lack in protein. And mushrooms are a vegetarian food that is very high in protein and also can be a sustainable activity. And so she did a lot of work with a non-government organization called BAIF, B-A-I-F, in promoting mushroom cultivation within various villages and providing that as a sustainable income-generating activity for women. Because that's something they can pretty much grow in their backyard, right? As long as you have certain controls around environment, etc. And so for me, it was important to follow in those footsteps. And so there's an organization called Aim for Seva that I have identified, and they tend to do a lot of work around education in villages, and they particularly go to the especially backward villages where resources are few and far between. And so, we wind up trying to sponsor some students and, taking care of some infrastructure costs and so forth, to the extent we can. But it's very much a grassroots level operation. And, I'd love to continue to do more.
Well, it gives you an opportunity to go back home, right?
Yes,
so that's nice too. I asked that question also because I wonder how it impacts, I'm sure it does, impacts your culture at Veridium to see their leader like yourself doing such great humanitarian work and bringing Veridium, and Veridium also doing humanitarian work, how that impacts the culture there.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because to be honest, I actually keep my private life very private.
Until now.
This is the first time I'm actually talking about this openly. But no, I think my team knows that I'm a big believer of mission, a big believer of there has to be something more than just the monetary outcome behind the cause. And again, like you said, being in Veridium, where we have a strong set of technology, but there's also a humanitarian angle that we can tackle, kind of makes it rewarding. That it kind of puts the jump in my steps in the morning.
Yeah. Because when you're at 230% of your goal, I mean, it's like, what else do I reach for, right? You got to reach for something greater than yourself. So with such a tremendous career and so many great accomplishments and achievements, what's something that when you look back, you might say, I wish I could have a little redo to that one? And if not, that's okay too.
Look, it would be it would be a falsehood to say that you don't have any regrets, right? But I've always believed that failure is not quite as frightening as regret, and so I do tend to really live in the moment, look forward, and I'm sometimes these bets work out, sometimes they don't, and when they don't, you can always second guess yourself, right, as to should I have done this, what was missing in what I put into that. But on balance, I won't change a thing.
That's wonderful. I'm gonna just rephrase a question here, only to see if maybe there is something there. Is what is one failure maybe that you learned so much from then that you would have regretted if you didn't have that failure?
Yeah, look, that's a great question, and I have to go back to my Atlantis experience, and this was a big lesson learned for me personally, and I know some of the team members as well. I mentioned the hype cycle of business, and one of the things that's really important for business leaders and even individuals to really be mindful of is that the market is a fluid thing, and it can change on you at the drop of a dime. So when something is innovative at a point in time, it means that you have a rapidly closing window within which it stays innovative. And if you get past that window, you are now exposed to other competing pressures that you hadn't factored in previously. And so with Atlantis, towards the later half of the experience, what we saw was that the market had changed, and we needed to pivot into becoming more of the same. And that's where we took a software product and made a hardware product out of it. But in so doing, we wound up actually with a cash burn situation that we hadn't anticipated. And I feel that if we had made that pivot a lot sooner, where the early warning signs were there, but we just didn't react fast enough. And I think that's a very important lesson learned. It taught me not just what to do, but more importantly, what not to do. Don't ignore those early warning signs.
And again, which is a common theme that I've heard from people in your position, is reacting soon enough, is reacting quickly, making a decision very quickly. Thank you so much for sharing that experience. I think our audience learned a tremendous amount just from that right there. Is we can learn so much from our failures. And it makes me think when the way that you responded to my question there was like Wayne Gretzky says, you're going to miss 100% of the shots you don't take. And so I love that you live without that regret of anything, because you got to take the shot, right?
Absolutely.
Awesome. So can you just give us a website? Everything will be in the show notes. But if you would just like to share, if anybody would like to visit your website and learn more about what Veridium does and how they could reach out to you.
Absolutely. The website for Veridium is www.veridiumid.com. VERIDIUMID.com.
Great. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Rajiv. I've had a great time with you.
It's been a pleasure for me as well. Thank you for having me and listening to my thoughts.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for listening to The Michael Esposito Show. For show notes, video clips, and more episodes, go to michaelespositoinc.com/podcast.